City of Phoenix Planning Commission regular meeting Monday, January 27th, 2025. Let's roll call, please.
Commissioner Monsu,
Yeah, here.
Commissioner Helfrich,
Here.
Commissioner Luz is absent. Commissioner Hanson, absent.
Not anymore.
He is here. Commissioner McFadden,
Here.
Commissioner Norpshin. Okay.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
So at this time, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have the minutes from November 25th meeting. Those that were here. Where are we there? There it is. Looks like Marcia, you were here for the 25th. Did you get a chance to take a look
I
at the
did
minutes?
not get the email.
I'm sorry.
I did not get the email.
Okay.
I apologize. It was very late this afternoon. So if you'd like to push it to the next meeting, that's A-okay. They're done and ready, and so it won't hold us up if you'd like to just
Sure.
hold off.
Okay, if we could push the 25th agenda approval to next meeting, we'll do that. Okay. Anyway, now public comment. Obviously, there isn't any, so I don't need to read unless there's somebody online. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. If there is no public comment, then we'll close that portion and go on to the new business. And new business, first thing is the election of Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair.
And I have utmost respect for those of you who have been here, so I hesitate to speak on whether I speak humbly. But I did have a chance to, I did call each person who I had not met before on the planning commission to introduce myself. And I did hear from everybody great gratitude and respect for Terry as chair.
Oh, thank you.
Also understood that there was the vice chair position that was open and that there was some excitement about some new energy coming in. And I do know Sarah has a great background in working with policy and her job with DEQ, as well as a good demeanor and ability to hold a meeting really well. And so I would like to make a motion to nominate Terry as the chair and Sarah as.
I will second that.
Okay, I think we can combine those finally. Okay,
Absolutely.
so we have a first and we have a second. So a roll call, please.
Commissioner Monso,
Yeah,
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrich,
Yes.
Commissioner Luz is absent. Commissioner McFadden
Yes.
and Commissioner Norpshin.
Yes.
Okay. Motion passes.
Motion passes, so. All righty. Next item of business is the lost my place here. Looks like we're looking at DC 24-6 Development Code Amendment. LDC Chapter 2, starting with page 6. Was that how I read the second, or does
Yes,
it
sir.
matter?
Yes, sir. You want me to jump on into it? Okay.
Absolutely.
So, okay, I'm taking it from the top then. Zach wanted to be here tonight. He is recovering from a cold. He kind of lost his voice. He'll be back in action probably tomorrow, if I had to guess. But basically, since we, had a quorum, we needed to get some of that, action items done anyways for the, appointment of the chair and vice chair at the first meeting. So that was the main impetus, but also a good refresher too for the for the new commissioners here to basically catch up to where this process started back in 2023, and we last touched this item in October of 24. So I figured if not for that appointment of the chair and vice chair, this could really have been just a study session. But we had to get that done per the municipal code. So this is going to be pretty informal. We can go as long or as short as you want. My objective here tonight is I'm going to basically brief you, get you up to speed as best I can. And then we'll start basically going through chapter 2, I think is probably a great spot. Although we did touch the residential code back in October, could not hurt to have a refresher. It's been a while, right? So if that sounds like a game plan, we'll just proceed from there. So this item in particular, Development Code 2401. Here. Awesome. I apologize. I didn't have your phone number. I texted everyone else, but I didn't have anything for you.
This is Chris Luz. These are two new commissioners. And so we've
Hey, how are you? Good.
nominated chair and vice chair. So now we're on to the code.
Who's chair? Who's vice? Thank you.
Sarah. Madden?
Excuse me?
Your last name, I'm sorry.
Norption.
Norption. I knew I was going to have to ask you how to say that.
It looks complicated, but.
It does. Yeah, it does.
We'll order
Thank you.
some nameplates for next meeting too, just helpful for everyone, right? So we'll put that on the list of things to do. Commissioner Luz, I was just briefing everyone else here that basically we're focused tonight on a development code update. You're pretty new to the commission, so I figured this will be a great opportunity for us to delve into a new chapter altogether. And we'll go from there. I'm going to start just by giving like a high level overview of what we're going to be talking about, and then we'll kind of hone in on one of the chapters in particular tonight. You got it. Chair Helfrich, you okay with me to proceed then?
I'm sorry.
You good with me to proceed? Just
Yes,
through this step
absolutely.
forward? Okay.
Yeah.
Christina, if you could load the PowerPoint, be a good reference. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at basically updating the zoning code in a comprehensive manner, going through chapter by chapter. This has been guided by a basically a land use consultant that the city hired back in 2023 to basically, she's very familiar with state law and what other cities are doing. And so she basically did an audit and compared our code against what model code looks like for other jurisdictions and compared it against OARs to basically give us some recommendations for like things we should tighten up, discard, or add to be compliant with state code. And so that's basically what this says up here. We're just looking for consistency and getting rid of inconsistency. We're trying to make the code clearer. And what that means is kind of like consolidating definitions that are duplicative or kind of confusing, and just make the code easier to read for someone who doesn't live and breathe it every day. Yeah.
A couple meetings ago, I think there was Garrett West. I think he's a land use attorney, and then he said that he was responsible for some of our code at that meeting.
Yes, sir.
Because he came in with the other. Joe Slaughter.
Mhm.
Yeah, so he came in with Joe Slaughter, and I think they're working for one of the.
Yeah, so a little update on that may tie in a little bit. So our code is constantly evolving. That was another development code update. Garrett West and Joe Slaughter. Joe Slaughter was the former, what was he? Basically deputy city manager, but his background's in land use. And so he had been working on the PH5 or basically this large, technology employment and community district zone in the northeast part of town. And so, since he had seen it most of the way through, we took it to the finish line back in November of last year. So you're right, Garrett West was responsible for drafting most of that code for the TEC zone specifically. This stuff, not so much. It's been
just compared against all the other codes.
Yeah.
For all the municipalities and.
so what Garrett Right. So what Garrett was working on was site specific to that TEC zone in the northeast side of town. But here we are back again to take a more comprehensive look at literally from page 1 to page 350 or whatever of our zoning code and just make sure we're consistent. So definitely a little different this time around. And so taking a step back for a second, our first step, this is a multi-phase kind of a project here. First step really was identify the inconsistencies and the language we have to tighten up and all that stuff. That's this file here, DC 2401. Once this is done and we're not like blatantly running afoul of any state laws, we're going to clean this up. And then step number 2 will be to codify it so it's easily searchable on our municipal code online. And then step number 3, that'll be the most controversial one because that involves policy changes. So like the shoulds and things like that, the discretionary type stuff where it's like, should we look at allowing 2 ADUs for, a property versus 1 and things like that, where it's actual true policy change and things like that. That'll be step number 3. The intent of this DC 2401 is simply to clean up and tidy up the code. It's housekeeping. We're really trying to avoid anything contentious and policy related. It's just housekeeping at this point. So housekeeping, then codification, and then policy related stuff, which the policy stuff, the reason why we're pushing that to the latest is because it's like, that'll probably take the most time.
That'll take over the whole discussion.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it at that time, but when Garrett said it, he's like, well, we actually use the mixed zone because he said that everywhere around Oregon, you're finding out when you segregate housing and working places of office, then
Commute,
people have
yeah.
to move further and further
Yeah.
until it's been clogging up ODOT and highway system because people live further and further away from where they work, and they don't have to be that way. And I thought that was an insight, and I didn't know those kinds of insights were even available to us, nor that then I was also surprised that we'd already codified it, but I didn't understand that it was already there.
There's a lot to know, right? Well, when I was listening to him talk about that, he had mentioned that Springfield, or was it Springfield?
Springfield, Eugene, because
Yeah.
that's like these little satellite
Yeah.
towns on the outside of a bigger Eugene city.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Phoenix is. We're
Kind of a satellite community.
one
Yeah.
stop in between Medford and Ashland. There's a second stop and it's called Town. Phoenix, up here, there's 2 stops, so
Yeah.
technically we can make our own rules, but
Right.
some people just realize, oh, this is just how it.
So, yeah, please continue for sake of time.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. So, I think I basically summarized the intent of this whole thing. Now, really quickly, we'll just run through. Okay. So I told you the scope. We're looking at the whole darn land development code. But we're going to break it up by chapter just to keep it simple. And so I figured I'd describe, like in a nutshell, what each chapter is for. The chapter 1 kind of explains the purpose of the zoning code, how it's administered, and provides definitions. We've covered the definition section in June of last year. We're going to cover it again before any decisions are made. But we took feedback from the commission of 2024 and made some changes already. So this is, these binders I made for you, the development code audit binders. They're living and breathing and they're evolving. And so half of my objective tonight is just to take more feedback from you all. And it doesn't have to come tonight too. Maybe something comes to mind, after taking a look at this, send us an email and we will make edits to that, code as we continue to go through here. So basically, yeah, chapter 1, it's largely about administration of the code, definitions. And so we've covered a lot of that. And then in October, we just started working on the land use districts, basically the zoning districts for the town. This chapter 2, it's all about the where, right? It covers the industrial, commercial, and residential zones, including the new TEC zone. And I just wanted to let you guys all know too, we just updated that, the zoning code. It's effective as of January 15th with that new TEC zone. So if you want to see it, it's online. But I thought I'd just mention that too. If you just wanted to see the final form after you adopted it back in November, it's there and ready. So yeah, chapter 2 is all about the land use districts. So we're going to be talking about these tonight. Our hope is with chapter 2 is to thank you for advancing the slide, because we're trying to homogenize each chapter, right? Or each zone. So the residential, we'll start with a purpose statement, the allowed use table, and then talk about dimensional standards and things like that from there. Same thing with the commercial zone. We want the format to appear very similar. So it's like, doesn't matter if you're looking at residential, commercial, or industrial. The only real differences should be what the uses are allowed in that zone and maybe specific standards for certain uses. So we're trying to make them look familiar and basically, similar. Because right now, if you look at the residential district and compare it to the industrial district, it's quite different. And so what we've done is model a lot of these changes based on the CH zone, which was one of the more recently updated zones, and it had a really good, clean use table. So we're trying to basically make everything look a little bit more like the commercial highway zone, because it was most recently done. So cruising along from here, chapter 3 we'll talk about probably at the next meeting, or maybe even the one after that, depending on how long we stay tonight. Chapter 3 is all about the design standards. Everything from vehicle access and parking and landscaping requirements to lighting standards, erosion control, environmental overlays for so what do you do with steep slopes? What do you do in riparian areas? Flood code. It's all in chapter 3, and that's how we want to keep it too. So anything that's just design standard related, we're trying to get into chapter 3. Because chapter 2 is, when you look at most codes and most jurisdictions, they have one section that's like this talks about the zones and this talks about the allowed uses in this zone. And then they have a separate chapter that talks about, and here's the nuts and bolts of how you get something built. So we're basically trying to be more consistent with, like Jackson County's development code and, Medford and Ashland. They've just done a really good job of cleaning up. Okay, here's the standards for individual uses, and then here's the uses that are allowed in 2 distinct areas. Moving on from there, chapter 4 is all about review procedures and application pathways. It provides, flow charts more or less for okay, if it's a type 1 application, this is the process for that. If it's type 2, this is a process for that. And, this prescribes how we notify people. So if you ever have a question as a commissioner, well, what are they required? What is planning staff required to do for noticing? You can find that information in chapter 4.1 of what's required of us, and what's required of an applicant too, right? Because if we don't publicly notice something, not only does that, jeopardize the city, but it's not good for the applicant either, right? Because that's grounds for, appeal if we don't do it right. Chapter 4.2 is specific to site plans. 4.3, it's all about land divisions. 4.4 conditional use, 4.5 planned unit development. So yeah, this talks about the procedure for doing reviews. Chapter 5, this is all about variances and non-conforming uses, and then somehow cannabis facilities got nested in here. It's one of these application types does not look like the others, and so this is what cannabis facilities and how we regulate marijuana. One of my objectives is to make it very clear, there should be one section where, and we probably want to bring this back to chapter 3, the design standards, be okay, what are you proposing to do? Is it sales or, production? It should be clearer, because there's 3 or 4 different sections of our code right now about cannabis production and sales and what needs to be done. So it'd be great to have one area with regard to, whatever it is, cannabis, hemp, psilocybin, all these things changing. So, but obviously step one, no policy changes. We're just moving things together. We're not looking to change any policies and what's allowed and what's not this time. It's just cleaning it up and making it easier to
I
interpret.
think Chris, that's something you and I worked on.
The canvas,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
That's a
it's,
long time.
yeah, a long time ago. And so it's nice to clean it up. But yeah, mainly, I think the biggest thing was location. Schools, churches, things like that.
Yeah.
We had dozens of protesters.
Oh, it
Every
was-
single meeting, it was.
It was pretty wild.
When was that? About 2016,
It was
2017?
when the law was passed, when they law, and then some of the council, it's law, you can't. It's
Yeah.
law, people voted for it, so then we had to put a lot of that together.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clean.
100%. I know my objective is not to scrap anything,
Right.
but just to one point source. And then it parses it. Because for instance, Jackson County, in each zone's use table, it says like, cannabis cultivation or whatever. Is this an allowed use? Actually, it just breaks it into agriculture really. But there is a section in chapter 3 of the Jackson County Code, which is just like marijuana production, marijuana processing, marijuana sales, marijuana. It's just all. And so that's the dream for us as users of the code. It sure would be nice if we could just flip to one section and be like, okay, here it is. Okay, now we get into sales, production, whatever. So,
Yeah, what's interesting is that cities stand alone on how they regulate it.
yeah,
There's no state mandates or anything. It's just up to the cities on how do you guys want to handle it?
so yeah, same with psilocybin, I think.
That's a new one there. We
Yeah.
don't-
Although I think that, clinics are required to be involved. I don't think it's like, you can just open up a shop and I think you'll need to get the ODA involved and things like that. But
So
anyways,
we never addressed that one though, did we?
I think there was a vote on it, right?
I
And
think they're updating their code because a big thing is that they want to have it consumable on the premise. And so in order for them somebody to have their journey at the place, they have to be watched, but they want to do it in beautiful locations, which sometimes are in county lands. And there was a big one up there. Somebody bought some big ranch property that was up in the trees.
Mhm.
That's not zoned commercial. You can't do it there, but they're like, well, the people are gonna love the trees here.
yeah,
And they're like, okay, so now you have to do it in a sterile commercial building, which is probably the antithesis to probably some of the intent of it.
Yeah.
Going right up against our zoning.
yeah. I think that the city had a vote on psilocybin use. I'll do some research on it and see what came of it.
It's been around like
It's a couple of years.
now?
Couple
Not
of
very
years.
long. It's fairly new. Yeah. There's one just opened up in Ashland.
Okay.
Okay, anyway,
Um,
sorry.
No worries.
We don't want to rabbit hole here because there's stuff to go over. Go ahead, please.
No problem. Chapter 6 is all about Measure 37, which is, I think in a nutshell, entitlements that people had to apply for to make sure they didn't lose the ability to, further develop their lands, residential, like partitions and a certain quantity of dwellings and things like that. I think that there's some changes in this section yet. I have not up to speed in this section yet, but I think it's kind of like a appendix, a vestigial organ of sorts. I don't think we have not applied the code in the 3 years I've been here now, like one time, because I suspect that the base zoning code allows for development. It's way more intense than what people may have missed out back in the 90s or 80s when Measure 37 basically made sure that folks could, partition their land and get as many home sites as they needed on their properties. So I think it's extraneous. I think we're getting rid of it, but I'll follow up on this section because I'm just kind of curious. I don't spend any time in Chapter 6 because we don't get any Measure 37 applications in. So now that I've kind of given like a bit of an overview on each chapter in our zoning code, I'm going to go back to Chapter 2 and kind of just talk through we'll go as long or as short as you want, but last time when we did this, we got through the residential stuff and it was getting pretty late. So unless you want to just, if you have particular questions or you want to jump to something and see something else, I think the plan is just to start at residential and we'll go through it since we have 3 new commissioners here who have probably not seen too much of the residential zoning code explained yet. So, yeah. So a lot of this stuff it's clean, it's housekeeping, like I said. The first thing, basically what we have up in front of us is a PowerPoint presentation that shows the use table and changes proposed to it by the planning consultant. And just line by line, it's basically going through here and explaining why these changes are proposed. So as you can kind of see on here, the first line item is the item itself, right? So the consultant carefully went through each of these items proposed to change and gave them a number. And then a reference to the code section, explained the issue, and kind of, she didn't always prescribe, here's what I think you should do. Sometimes she would say something to think about, as opposed to making a prescribed change. So the first one is basically saying, here we have the residential section, and it talks about the high density, medium, and low density zones. And then it talks about HO. What the heck is that? And that's a Hillsinger overlay. And so she basically, her feedback was to either describe the darn thing in additional detail, or kind of get rid of it because it's more of an overlay than an actual zone. The Hillsinger overlay only affects a small portion of our town in the southwest side. And it basically, my read of it is that the intent of the Hillsinger overlay is to keep the lots fairly large, like kind of like a hybrid between like urban and rural. So it's higher density than, say, if you're county zoned, but it's definitely lower density than our low density zone. So moving on from there, that sounds like maybe I'm getting too much into the weeds. So slow me down if you need to, but okay. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. So I think right now, her intent is not to strike it, or the intent as it's currently written in this draft is to not get rid of the Hillsinger overlay or anything like that, but just to flesh it out a little bit, provide a bit more detail so that people aren't wondering what the heck HO is. Let's see here. 2.2.1A. So that's literally the title of the zone. The district, let me flip to my live code here. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. Purpose for residential districts. I think basically in a nutshell, what she was recommending is homogenizing it a little bit because the purpose statement right now talks about particular uses. And the table does a great job of like line by line talking about them. So the purpose statement should be consistent with the actual use table. And that's not policy related, as you can see on the right-hand side. So there's 2 categories. There's current and there's future. And the future stuff, usually she marks it as future because it is policy related. Moving on to table 2.2 on page 30. This is one of the tables that we use on the daily at the planning counter. Yeah.
Actually, 2.2.1 development standards based off of her recommendation, right? And her statement says in her notes here that the most restrictive standards shall apply. A statement like that could be added to introduce development standards table. So she's recommending we get rid of this and consolidate it by saying the most restrictive standards shall apply to that. Recommendation.
Let's see here. Is that note 40?
This is number 40.
Yeah, that looks accurate. That she's basically trying to clean up this standard. Where's the I'm kind of curious where the where ended up the addition, right?
Says it could be added to introduce development standards table.
Make a note on that one. Maybe it's something that just just a brief explanation. Each of you, if there's anyone who doesn't have a copy of this audit binder, by the way, please let me know. I'm pretty sure I got one to each of you, but the comments on the side off to the right, we have D is Dick Converse. He was a longtime planner at RVCOG and Jackson County and Josephine County before retiring, and he helped basically review the results of the audit. And then ED, Elizabeth Decker, is the planning consultant that did the initial audit. So when we're looking at these comments, and then we've got Zach ZM in here too. So those will be the three basically main auditors of this table. But I'm going to make a note on that strictest shall govern. I think there's a section in chapter 1 that talks about most strict interpretation in the code shall govern, because there's so many cross references and things between chapter 2 and 3. So I'm making note of that though. Make sure it's in there. Yep. Okay. So the next item here, Elizabeth is basically recommending that we break up this table into 2 tables. One table that's just uses, and the second table is setbacks, density, square footage of, I think that one's probably going away if I had to guess, because I'm not sure how enforceable the dwelling size is these days by state law. But yeah, I kind of tend to agree with that feedback, but if you have any input, I'd welcome it too. How do we like seeing the table on page 30 as one table versus 2? One table talks about the allowed uses in each zone. And then
Which table is it?
Table 222.
Okay.
So currently, as proposed, it's broken into 2 tables. But you can see it's also on the back page as the way it used to be, one giant combined table. Can you bring up the zoning code on one of your tabs there? Thanks. We'll show a live version. So yeah, it's just something to think about. We can come back to it, but basically Elizabeth is suggesting talk about uses in one table and then talk about all the dimensional details in another table. And that would be consistent with how other jurisdictions do it for the most part. This is the first jurisdiction I've worked for that combines the 2. It's, yeah.
The comment B8 says number 50. Maybe I saw the I would understand, but it looks like regarding potential elimination of multi-family houses from R1 to avoid the need to permit residential care facilities in that zone. Is that a policy change?
No, well, I think that we're definitely not doing that. I think that maybe this comment may be a little confusing as worded. Because certainly the intention is not to remove any uses that are allowed in the zone. I think the intention here of this comment was to clarify what the heck a residential facility is versus a residential home, which are very tightly regulated by state law. So, yeah, there's no intention to remove multifamily. And as you know, I would be really nervous if I saw the strike through over multifamily housing in that table, but I don't see that. So I think the comment's just a little confusing as worded. There is no intention to get rid of multifamily in any of the land use districts. Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I see what you're saying now. I think I see what you're saying. I bet, okay, let me read this comment here. I hope why she did that is because of an evolution in state law. Because it can look like discrimination really quick, right? If we say conditional use required for certain residential care facilities and things like that. So let me make a little note on 229.
I think you and I talked about this because we know of a couple and state law overruled.
Yes. Yeah. So those were for homes versus facilities. So last time I looked at the state law, it said homes, type 1 use, like basic level review. There were only a couple of things we were allowed to regulate, and one of those was parking, and we can't regulate that anymore either. So it's like literally like one thing. It's like make sure they have a license, I think, is like the only thing for the, and that's because a home can provide care for I think up to 5 care recipients. And then anything over, I think it's between like 6 and 15 is a facility. And so historically, the state law said conditional use is fine. But this, I want to double check. I don't know how it got to be permitted. Last time I looked at the state law, it said conditional use.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Sure. It was rather like a policy.
Sounds like policy.
So.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Great point. And I hope that it's less of a policy thing and more like a coming in line with state law. That's probably what I think it probably is, but I will verify. You got it. Moving on down through this list, a lot of these definitions changed just so that they're more comparable to how they're defined in state law. And then the community garden thing was just to kind of clarify definition wise what the allowed uses are is a community garden agriculture. And so we wanted to make it crystal clear that yes, agriculture and community gardens are one and the same. Let's see. And then more definition work with the church definition. We took that from one section and basically brought it into its own separate conditional use. So no policy change here, but it was more just like cleaning up definitions. And then let's see here. Christina, did you bring that code up? Thanks. If you could jump to page 30 in it. Awesome. So this is just what I want to show you all, like while we got it in front of us. What Elizabeth proposes is, parsing them out, and then here's how it looks currently live. So this table is pretty huge. It's the whole page, and it talks about here's all the allowed uses. It's got density in there. It's got setbacks, building height. It's a lot of information. And so it's just something to think about. It wouldn't be a policy change to break it into 2 tables, but it would be a little cleaner. But at the same time, this is probably the most used page in our whole zoning code. People come here the most. So I don't think either way is going to break it, but just something to be thinking about. If you do have a preference, let me know. Moving on from here, we're basically jumping into, there's some standards in the chapter 2 zone, in the chapter 2 code, which belong more in the land division and land partition section of our code. And so a lot of Elizabeth's comments here are just addressing that, like talking about the Hillsinger overlay and how there's minimum lot sizes and things like that. Well, this probably, although there should be mention of it in the hills in this section, the bulk of these new lot dimensional requirements probably belongs with the land division standards, which is just how most jurisdictions do that. Let's see. Then moving on to the setback section, our code has lots to say about setbacks. And I think, again, mostly what she's trying to do is clean up some inconsistencies. One of the items I see here is talking about exceptions and making those consistent. Let's see here. And then we can see that Elizabeth moved those dimensional standards into its own table in 225. So that's kind of what it would look like as she proposes it. But policy, again, it's not changing. Like the dwelling unit range is staying the same. The size of the dwelling, those aren't changing. Things like that. It's just moved out. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just a heads up too, it's in your code binder. I just kind of broke it up into like little digestible pieces on the presentation, but I'm happy to provide that too. Yeah. Let's see here. Yes, so this is a notorious one, item 48 here, the garage item. And this is something that I would ask you all to be on the keep an eye out for, because there are so many sections of our code that say parking required, and we're trying to nuke all that. We're trying to like get rid of it all. For instance, home occupation, a home-based business talks about, oh, you can provide this much parking, but not that much. Well, it's like, not anymore. We just need to clean up those standards and get rid of them because, there was state law changes that say the city cannot require parking within a certain distance. I think it's 3/4 of a mile or a half mile of a frequent transit corridor. And Highway 99 is a frequent transit corridor. That's like 90% of our town is in this overlay. And so what we're planning on doing is, instead of imposing parking rules on the remainder 10% of the community, it seems cleaner just to get rid of all those, to be in line with state law. And so that's another code project separate from this one that we're working on. But so yeah, something to be thinking about is, as you're going through this draft code that Elizabeth put together with these track changes in it, is if you see any requirements for parking, please let us know. We're trying to be in compliance with state law and get rid of them all. And so yeah, home-based businesses, we're going to go to that. We're going to talk about that section either tonight or next meeting. Short-term rentals and things like that have requirements for parking. Can't require it. There's a whole bunch of scenarios where it's like, oh, did you consider parking? What will happen is, what we're thinking about doing is basically taking the old table for required parking and making it recommended. So you can do this, and if you choose to, you still got to pave it and do the stormwater, retention and things like that. But and we'll still have a cap on parking too, so you couldn't just turn half the town into a parking area. That wouldn't work. That wouldn't conform to state law either.
Aren't we working on 3 parking here in town?
Yeah.
So how's that coming? Or we,
Yeah, that project is slowly coming along, but it is. We got a federal grant for it's called peer funding, and I forgot what the acronym stands for, but basically the intention of this grant is to do some centralized parking downtown, publicly available parking, because one of the biggest burdens for commercial development in a downtown is like, usually you'd like to have parking for your patrons, right? Even if it's not the best environmentally, most people want to have like some readily available parking. So the city is taking on the role of providing that and the stormwater infrastructure underneath the parking areas too. So it'll be way more plug and play when someone wants to do a commercial development in the downtown area. They won't have to worry about the stormwater infrastructure, which is expensive. They won't have to worry about the parking improvements. That's expensive. Because we got a federal grant for either 3 or 4 parking areas in the downtown, all kind of distributed.
Is it
Yeah.
for?
Yeah, so they're on, I believe, urban renewal properties, and we'll have to work with a couple of private landowners too for like, getting stormwater easements and things like that. But it'll be pretty cool. It'll reduce some of the burdens on people who want to build commercial developments in the downtown. Stormwater and parking it's expensive stuff.
I like what we have here is impervious pavers.
Yes, yeah, it's pretty unique too. The only other example I can think of something like that comes to mind is like, Chuck Roberts Park in Talent has those pervious, like grassy kind of tile things too. But yeah, pretty unique example.
So are these gonna have some of that stuff in there, the 4 parkings that we're looking at? I mean, is it gonna be designed like that? I mean, is that?
Did they break
There-
ground in the parking lot?
They're still, to answer just that question first, because I will
Okay.
jumble them all up.
That's his.
The first
I
question will be,
apologize.
no problem. No,
that's
it's,
his project. I
I-
just was wondering if you knew where we were.
yeah,
How
so
far out
they're in the
is it?
design phase right now, to answer your question. I don't know if it's going to be like traditional versus asphalt, or if it's pervious pavers, but I think they're undergrounding the stormwater, and I think there's going to be some like grassy swales and things like that along with it. But I think
Okay.
the design is just started because it costs money. And so, because it's a federal grant, there's all these steps and all these like requirements to do before you can get a check cut. So
Wow.
we it is progressing, but we just got to the opportunity to where it's like, yes, we can get reimbursed for design and engineering. So it is rolling. It's just going slow.
Just approved like 3 or 4 months ago, so it's brand new. Approved.
Yeah. And so I think Christina's part of that. And does that sound like a pretty good, summary? We could probably get more information on that, where that's at next time too. But another exciting project, speaking of like environmental things, because it seemed like that's where you're kind of going, is the park master plan is advancing along as well. And there's talk about doing a whole bunch of improvements to, I think it was called Bicentennial Park once upon a time, but it's basically like the pond in this area back here with the pervious pavers. Some potential for doing like a deck with some seating out there and things like that, and some trees. We might be able to, we're looking to get some funding for trees along that Bear Creek Drive / Highway 99 corridor there, because right now, not much shade in that water. I mean, rumor has it there's like fish in the pond and things like that. So getting some shade would be a good thing. So
Saw a white heron today. Every
Mhm.
time I see a heron, wasn't a blue heron, but a blue
Yeah, I
heron.
saw
typically
one
there.
there.
They're
Yeah.
amazing
Right
birds.
through here.
It was always just right in that.
that's awesome.
Mhm. We're in the right direction.
Yeah. Jumping back into chapter 2. So yeah, some of the code we're working on is cleaning up like all those parking requirements and references there. And then we have a couple inconsistencies in our architectural design standards that Elizabeth's called out. Can you go forward a slide? Let's see here. Yep. And so this is another good housekeeping example here, where we're trying to make these like single family detached consistent with, like, is it a townhome? Is it, something else? So this is going to be some great cleanup work here, just making the definitions consistent in chapter 2 to chapter 1. Let's keep cruising to the next slide. Let's see here. Yeah, this is a little bit more cleanup and compliance with state law, as Elizabeth points out. We just want to make it abundantly clear what types of dwellings are allowed, because There was a time where manufactured, homes were kind of sort of frowned on and things like that. And then we get questions at the counter quite often, like, how about a prefabricated home and things like that. And so the intent here is to stay in compliance with state law, which says a house is a house is a house. It's just, the question for us should be, does it meet state building code? It's as simple as that. So, when people come in and they say, hey, I want to do this modular unit, our question is simple, does it meet state building code? As opposed to, oh, it doesn't specifically say prefab dwellings, doesn't specifically say manufactured homes, things like that. So just more cleanup there. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. We talked a little bit about this one, just bringing those definitions more in line with ORS's. This time, we're not talking about residential care homes, but this is family child care. Bringing it in line with the ORS, not policy related, because just trying to not run afoul of state law. Let's see here.
16 kids in one house. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. 16 or fewer. Okay. Let's move along to the next one. Yeah. So we talked through a couple of these already, but this basically says we should make the Hilsinger overlay kind of consistent across the board when it comes to dimensional standards. So should be no surprise, like where the table already talks about the lot sizes for R1 and R2 and R3, it should also talk about the Hilsinger overlay in there too, which it currently doesn't.
Well, I mean, this Hilsinger overlay is just not normal. A part of our, I mean, are we going to see any more where you have residential butting up to agricultural land? I see that in PH5 on the east side. Some of those properties can be buttoned up to farmland. Is it going to be an overlay too, or what initiates an overlay?
Yeah. So back in the past, I would guess that overlay is probably 20 plus years old, if I had to guess, because
yeah. I can remember.
I'll bet that this was probably a condition of some kind of annexation, or when a big chunk of land came into the city limits, I'll bet that the overlay was applied to prevent folks on the periphery from being like, oh my gosh, the city's in my backyard now.
Right.
And so I can research this overlay a little bit. I think if we're trying to stay true to that whole policy change, neutral thing, I think we got to leave it alone for now. But to answer your question too, I think that the overlay does extend past the city limits, surprisingly, meaning like there's some properties in the UGB that when they're annexed in, it'll automatically apply to those. But I can verify that. I have a GIS map that I programmed that overlay into. So with a couple of clicks, we can all see if we want to hop on the website and go to the interactive map and verify that. But ultimately, yeah, I would say this affects, I don't know, 10 to 15% of the town to the southwest there. It's not a huge percentage, but yeah, it's something we could maybe put on the list of things to, readdress
Just
during the.
seems like it should go away sometime or another and become not that.
There's also some taxing ramifications regarding the overlay. They can tax, I guess, the homes to build sidewalks and roads.
Yeah,
right.
There's some kind of weird tax nuance with the overlay also.
Yeah.
Sometimes overlays come into play because things like the interchange change.
Right.
So we get a trip overlay because something new happened.
Oh, that's right.
And it was the
We have like 7 overlays.
We do.
We have a lot.
Greenway, ODOT.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one that's interchange development charge specific and one that's about the amount of trips a property can have. We have historic overlays.
And those are overlays. yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
We have a slope overlay. But yeah, this one, I'd love to know the history about it. I think you made a great point, in that infrastructure is probably not as developed in that part of town as it is, in the center and along, like Highway 99 and things like that. I know that there's a couple projects on the horizon to improve like water service. I think it's along Camp Baker Road or something like that. But so that might be one of the reasons why once upon a time we were like, hey, don't subdivide too much because we don't have the infrastructure to support dozens and dozens of homes here yet.
Well, there is water on Camp Baker Road. That's where our water comes in.
Right. But I don't know.
Part of our water.
I would want to take a look at the GIS though and see like how it's sized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that it's not just sidewalks holding that area of town back from like being higher, developed at higher densities. But yeah, you're right. That's where it comes from. And then which basically goes northwest, right? All the way to that little pump station in southeast Medford.
Mhm. It comes in there.
But I'll make a little note of that too.
That's the
Hilsinger over
Kings
that.
Highway pump station.
Yeah, right.
That's what they
Right.
call it.
And
Kings
it
Highway
comes up
Pump
Coleman Creek and down Camp Baker.
Yeah, I'd like to know the origin of this overlay because there's no other ones like that really where it's like just limiting.
So it seems like there's never been, the residents in that area really don't want any changes. It seems like, I mean, they haven't come to the city and want out of the overlay because it's going to cost them more.
It seems like from my perspective, answering phone calls and, emails and things like this, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some folks are really excited to annex in and then
Or are they?
do infill. And then, some of the neighbors are really nervous about it because there's a couple private roads in that area. And it's just like they're sort of already serving all these county, like customers or, you've got these county users. And so, yeah, it seems to be a mix. The people who are in the city are really excited to be part of it. The folks on the county side are a little bit more nervous.
Thank you.
So we'll keep cruising along here. Number 57. I would love to see this change because flag lot is a particular type of a land division. It's sometimes they call it like a panhandle lot and things like that. But these are just parcel geometry shapes, and they should, if someone proposes to do a flag lot where you have a little stick for access that leads to the actual parcel in the back, I think it would be great if this would be co-located with the land division code in chapter 4. So that's what Elizabeth's recommending. And again, not policy, just a move in location. Let's cruise to the next slide. Oh yeah. So this is Elizabeth's kind of concern with this is there's a lot of discretionary language used here, and we don't really love discretionary language when we're dealing with type 1. So residential is kind of an interesting thing because most of this development, we're trying to make the burden to developments less onerous, right? And so when you use words like sufficient and maximum extent possible and impractical, and encourage, these are all discretionary terms that usually we like to bring to you guys, the planning commission. And so what she's saying is you should clean up this language, basically, unless you want these to become discretionary. It would just help with consistency if these were more black and white. And basically if they provided, instead of saying of a sufficient size to allow for this, they would just prescribe of a size of 5 or less or whatever that, that would make it more black and white and things like that. So I think she acknowledges that, this is like half policy and half, let's see what we can clear up. And so I think she's just recommending do what we can for now and make notes of what is maybe a little too policy related for the next go around.
I wonder why it was left so ambiguous in the first place. Was it done that way purposely? so you don't have to do it a certain way and allow more flexibility in your building? Was there a purpose behind having it ambiguous? And what was the rationale behind it?
I can say this, in the last 10 years, the state has been leading the charge kind of in like, it seems like making housing of all different sizes easier to do, and basically encouraging cities to change their codes to be more supportive of reducing the review process. Like, so if say a multifamily process used to be conditional use back in the 90s, the state's really pushing us and, jurisdictions across the board to, hey, maybe make it a type 2 or a type 1 review where there's less discretionary calls like this. So I think some of this discretionary language is probably just a holdover from a different era, And our use table says, yeah, it's only a type 1 review now, but here we have all these little standards and things like that where it's like the language remained discretionary. And so she's basically just saying, let's make it consistent. But there are some land uses that are still type 2, like a multifamily development, still a type 2 review where there's some discretion allowed. So, but it's always cleaner, if you have a range, like a number amount or something like that, versus using words like sufficient and appropriate and things like that. Let's keep cruising. See section or item 60. Yeah. So we talked about this one a little bit. We're trying to clean up all these references. We're requiring garages and parking areas and things like that. And then this one is particularly bad because, and I've run into this problem in the past where it's like garages supposedly are only referenced as being required in the R1 zone. So it's like not required in the R2 and R3. Why? Seems a little arbitrary, but I mean that's how the code was, and so her recommendation basically is just to kind of clean it up either. And I think that by state law we're going to have to get rid of the garage and carport requirement just to be compliant with the climate friendly and equitable community, I think is what the other C stands for. The state law change there for parking requirements.
Didn't Zach bring that up that garages are no, by
Right.
state law are not required?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We got input from the local DLCD rep, and he said, reading between the lines, kind of, if you're not allowed to require parking in these areas, garages are. The argument was largely used for parking, although not exclusively, right? Like I don't use my garage for parking, but I think it was too close. And so when the local DLCD rep weighed in, the state rep weighed in, he said he recommended kind of against like enforcing garage and carports. So I think that's where we landed policy wise. So now when someone says, I want to do a carport or I want to get rid of it. Like if they do a carport, it still has to meet the design standards and locational standards. For instance, like we have standards on the books that say you can't do a carport in the front yard. It's got to be a side yard or rear yard type thing. But there was a customer we had who wanted to do in the front yard, and we said no, and she said, well, can you do a variance? And we said, we don't have code to require a garage. I mean, like we have the code, but it's, I guess the word vestigial coming back around again. It's we can't enforce it. And so therefore you can't say, hey, I need a variance for this thing that's the city's not going to require anymore. It's probably more than you wanted to hear on the subject. But anyways, I think the plan is to get rid of all references to that to stay in line with state code. Yeah.
All of self-transparency, I think one of that actually applied to my home, and I think I was one of the first people who benefited from the
CFEC change.
CFAC change, yeah. Well, because I had a garage conversion, and my mom's husband and I wanted to make a living space for her in the garage, but in order to do so, we'd be required to build a carport or garage to replace the one that was being used for living space. So that's a practical kind of use. We came in just at the end of that, so we were exempt. We were probably the first people to be exempt from that, and no longer needed to continue on with our plans for a carport. But that's a type of thing, and it does create a little bit of clutter in front of a home when you're trying to correct the decision from 1965 and put new structures in. So there are good problems that come along with it too. But I think mostly, at least from my experience and practical experiences, when you have people who are trying to create living space in garages or maybe these ADUs, as the governor is kind of encouraging, I think you're going to see that barrier is no longer there for them.
Still can have a garage, but the code just wouldn't force you to.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting too. It got me thinking, like, you know, my house in Medford, totally different place, but it didn't start with a garage. It was like a box. So these things evolve over time, and this is where we're at now, is, you know, allowing people to once again choose how they want their home to be. So it's
Well, you take like multiple family dwellings don't have, some don't have
Yeah,
any
right,
garages or
right.
carports or anything, just open parking. And yeah.
All right, moving on. Let's see here. 61 is a great example of, we need, she found we shouldn't be requiring parking for ADUs. So we're going to be striking that one, and that'll just keep us consistent with state law. There is a reference, item 62, to bicycle requirements and bike racks and things like that. And she points out that, hey, this stuff is already addressed in chapter 3.4. So let's consolidate and make sure it's consistent. But if we can get rid of this in the zoning section and put it in the standards section for all bicycle parking, that'll be cleaner. So let's move on to the next. Let's see here. Some of these graphics are a little outdated, so she's recommending changing them up to be a little bit clearer, to show the difference between architectural standards for a townhouse or other multi-unit. Let's see. There's some more discretionary language. Encourage variability in design. These are tricky things to navigate when an application comes to us and it's a type 1, you know, just like at the counter review, and we're like, oh, does that encourage variability? Like, we had one application come in for a 4-unit development on, I want to say Culver Road, and, you know, talking the applicant through this one, trying to help them out a little bit, you know, I remember this standard here, and they said, well, what's, you know, like, the more variability you have between dwellings, you know, it can be more expensive, right? Because a lot of folks, I'm sure you've all seen, like on Kings Highway, when it's like the duplex units there, and they're just kind of like reversed images of each other.
Yep.
So this code section is kind of basically saying, don't do that. But there is a cost. There's, you know, a cost associated with the more variability you have. You know, it's just more labor requirements. So this is something more like, in my mind, policy, and something that we'll be probably getting more into the weeds of in the next phase of this project. But it's just something to be thinking about too, is like, okay, there's a trade-off, right? When they're not just like mirror images in the design of the dwelling units, but certainly it adds character when they don't all look exactly alike. Let's see here. Yep. These ADU changes are basically just making sure we're in line with RS 197. Let's keep cruising. Okay, so again, the intent is just to maybe change definitions slightly so that manufactured homes and prefab structures are kind of viewed as one and the same on an individual lot, which, yeah, this changes just again to ensure consistency with state law. All right, keep cruising. Okay, so we have definition changes just to mirror state law. Let's see. standard suit. Yeah, so this one's going to require a little bit of work, the public and institutional land use one. I'm gonna make a note to like visit this one and see how can we address this without applying some policy accidentally. Public and institutional land uses. Okay, so a little bit more cleanup on item number 72. Because residential care facilities are a residential use, they're no longer considered institutional. So that's straightforward. Keep cruising. Yeah. So interesting point on 70A is that once upon a time, ADUs and accessory structures were limited to 50% of the main structure or 800 square feet. And then back in 2021, it was changed to where it's just for an accessory dwelling, it's 800 square feet. But accessory structures are still, they have this limitation in here. So basically Elizabeth's recommendation is to see if this, limitation on the size of the accessory structure is basically too restrictive and maybe delete it. And if so, we need to make a change to a table as well. So this seems like it's on the edge of policy as well, but it's something to be thinking about. We can come back to it. Like, do we like, are we okay with larger accessory structures in a residential zone? Separate from ADU, which are capped at 800 square feet still. Let's see. Okay, so 72 here. This one came up recently at the counter. Basically, someone asking, what's allowed, domestic livestock, farming, and what uses are allowed. Can I do like a farm stand? I think was the way it came up. But Elizabeth is basically trying to correct for a lack of definitions what we currently have, so that when people want to do like a little farm stand in town, it's clear as day in our code if that's yes or no. And so far, it seems like there's been some mild support from the commission on making sure someone can do like a little farm stand on their residentially zoned property, and it wouldn't fundamentally change their residential use behind it, kind of a thing. Like basically treat it like a home occupation. It's kind of what seems like staff is kind of looking at right now. And by tidying up the definitions for domestic, like livestock and farm stands and things like that, we'll be able to basically take this back around to you and see what you think about, farm stands and things like that.
Definitely a policy issue.
Yeah. Yeah. But clearing up the definitions, I think we could do that without worrying about policy, Let's see. Again, garage and carports. Cleaning that up. She recommends deleting the standards, requiring it. Let's move on to the next page. I think we're coming close to the end here too. Trying to be mindful of the time. Let's go forward. Okay. Was that forward? I'm like 65 now. I think we covered that one. Let's go to slide 20. Yeah, we already covered that. These must be out of sequence. We'll have to fix that. All right. Well, here we are basically at the end of the residential zoning code. We've got commercial to cover after this, and then industrial after that. Are there is there an interest in continuing on into the commercial stuff tonight, or you want to have a quick little discussion on things to close this out, and then we'll talk, what else is going on in town, and call it an evening. How are we all feeling?
What's everybody's preference? How much time would it take for industrial? That's about as long as what we've spent on this, right?
Commercial will be similar in size. Yeah, we'd probably be here another hour and a half.
I don't think so.
Good stopping point.
Yeah, it's,
Sounds
I
good.
think, we all kind of read this today and prepared for this.
Yeah.
So let's,
Okay.
everybody take a look at would you say residential or commercial or industrial?
So commercials next, and
Commercial
then
next, so everybody can kind of take a look at commercial and get feedback at that time rather than plowing through it tonight.
yeah, that sounds good.
So,
And if there is any, say you're parsing through here on your spare time and you run into a topic, you don't have to wait until the meeting to, ask more about it. And we welcome your feedback early on, and we can make changes too, because we've already made changes to some of the definitions in chapter 1. Based on your feedback, where we pulled some definitions from one section and put them in chapter 1. So it's a living, breathing document, and any changes that you want to see, just let us know, and we can certainly create a new track change document with those changes in it. What else can I say about this? So we kind of anticipate, this is kind of like the priority at this point, but then we've also got a couple other code amendments on the horizon. We have the FEMA floodplain code amendment. Yeah. We have a mass timber code amendment. We may have a code amendment for the Bear Creek revisioning process. And that would probably impact our commercial zones more than any other thing. What else? Those are the big ones.
Something that just kind of, I don't even know how we'd address it or how we can even get there, but with the fires that we've seen in California and fires we've had here, how much addressing do we get? How do we proactively promote? In other words, like my fire insurance is coming up, or my home insurance is coming up. So I'm getting ready to fireproof around my house, which is a lot. And so I don't know, it seems like something the city should be proactively considering and looking at. I don't know if it's on this level or council level or whatever, but it's really on the forefront of what we need to be considering as a city.
Fire-wise.
We encourage trees, but yet I'm going to have to do some limbing on some of my trees and things like that.
We want more residential infill, but we also want to double down on setbacks, make sure everything's far enough apart, so it doesn't.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of competing interests here.
My question would be, and take your time thinking about this, and I'll also convey this to Zach and see what's the most appropriate channel. But I'd be curious to know, is it the landscaping code that you'd like to see basically dialed in a little bit for Firewise landscaping? Is it because one thing I noticed in Talent shortly after the fires was even things you wouldn't expect, like the fence lines, right? There are all these cedar fences treated with some kind of sealer, right? Super combustible, and they acted like fuses between all the homes and things like that. So I guess my question would be, what kind of are we attacking this from a zoning perspective, building code, like reach code, what's?
That's control shop.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody come in and make a presentation who maybe can tell us what role land use planning can play in fire prevention and evacuation routes.
Yeah, I think so too. I think city council should be involved too.
Okay, I'll make some notes of this. One thing you had just mentioned about the evacuation routes, that is one thing we've gotten dialed in pretty well with the help of the county. It's been kind of a group effort, but we do have on our website posted evacuation routes. If you think of like a way that we can make this more clear and like transparent to the public, let me know. You do have to do a little bit of digging on our website to go to the map section and then find the evacuation routes, but it is
it
posted.
signage? I mean, do we have signage like fire, you know, I mean,
We just came from the coast, they have a tsunami.
We don't.
evacuation.
Yeah.
Right.
I've seen that.
Ashland has the signs up that say, the zones and where to go.
Yeah.
We don't.
We don't.
For fire?
Fire.
Because that's my main question is I've seen them for tsunami. I think that's super cool, but the fire thing is tough because like I think we can safely assume like, okay, the greenway is a liability, right? Like there's some, but you don't know for sure where it's coming from, right? And so the map we have right now, it just talks about evacuation zones, and the way the county integrates this is basically they send out, if you're signed up for Everbridge, they will say, hey, you're in evacuation zone, this, that, or the other, proceed this way, and they give you the basically, hey, be prepared, or like get out now, text messages, but I do also believe that they talk routes too.
Did you guys actually already do some of that? So it would be
Yeah.
maybe just us hearing from staff.
Yeah.
Or what that is, but it also does seem that there would be some experts who might be able to bring in.
Exactly.
So
Oh, you guys do stuff.
yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing what like, I know Ashland has some Firewise landscaping code, and I'd definitely be interested to see what that looks like.
Sometimes the use of bark,
Yeah,
the bark is one of the worst items. to have.
smoldering like days afterwards.
It's
Yeah,
horrible. The ambers of land and the bark landscaping just create huge hazards.
yeah. As we were doing it, we were doing an inventory of the damage after the fire, like days afterwards. So I saw definitely firsthand smoldering landscape
Yeah.
chips just hanging out
Oh,
days later.
Lost our playground because of the bark.
Ships.
Yeah. Yeah, great points.
But, yeah,
Um,
I just think that it's something that needs to be addressed.
We should.
And then we're also gonna get close, and then you're gonna get into policy, and then that's when council needs to be involved, but
Mhm.
I think that we really need to start kind of rattling the. It needs to be addressed soon, because we're coming in, it won't be long, we'll be in fire season, and
So what comes to mind for me is I think that the city council is going to have, if they don't already, they have a commission liaison for our, planning commission. And I think that would be a great point of contact where I can, connect you to. And then, because I think the way it works for us usually is we follow direction of the council. And so if you say, hey, this is on our minds, and then they task us to carry it out,
okay,
That's
let's
probably-
do that.
that's
Let's
probably
do that.
the way it'll go.
Let's tickle their ears, but and then I think even the fire people should be involved. I know that we've got 2 empty tanks over here. 2 empty tanks, thousands of gallons
It's in
of
the water reservoirs.
water reservoirs, and that was the big thing is. The biggest thing that happened here, and same thing happened in California, when Bear Lakes caught on fire, there was no way you could shut the water off, the main. And Martinez tried to, as he gets a phone call that his house is on fire, but he tried to turn off that main valve, and all the water of Bear Lakes drained the tank on that side. And that's what happened. If we got reservoirs is part of the discussion. That's the only thing I'm saying. Reservoirs is part of the discussion, even having ponds along Bear Creek for helicopters to dip out of. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that need to be brought up and brainstorm, and I like, having a workshop on how to use these empty tanks. I mean, I don't have the
They're really
answers.
small.
I just want to brainstorm some ideas
Conversation.
and follow
Yeah.
through with them.
Well, thanks for jogging my memory too, because one of the projects Zach has been working on has been, maybe he told you this already, but there's a reservoir on the northeast side of town. I think it's in PH 5.
Yeah, there's gonna be one there.
Yeah. So that will help. And one of the main reasons we were able to get it done is for things like that, in a crisis, it'll be another source that fire trucks can use to quickly, tank up and help out.
With that joint workshop, is that something that's allowed in the meeting rules?
Happy to take a look. I've seen, there's so many ways to do it, right? Like you could probably do a subcommittee. You could probably do, combined meetings with city council and things like that. Or, I mean, sometimes even just having a council liaison here for our meetings would be, that's another way to do it.
You should involve the Builders Association also, that the Builders Association should be involved and they'll give you tips on what's practical and not practical for building codes, make things more firewise.
Which association?
Builders Association of Southern Oregon, very
Awesome.
knowledgeable about building codes.
Definitely interested to have a conversation, learn more, and I'll pass this on to Zach tomorrow morning.
We can have the joint meeting between council and planning.
Yeah, that's easy to call and because it's going to turn into policy, I would think.
You can bring the fire department.
Could be huge, multi-agency,
Yeah,
But yes, to answer your question, I mean, like some of the work has been done, right? Like I know Chief Boker was pretty instrumental in making sure all the evacuation route stuff was up to snuff and well coordinated with Jackson County. So it'll be, if there is another emergency, notifications will go much smoother this time around, thanks to his work too. So.
And we have an emergency center.
Yes. Yeah. There's
part of the city hall is an emergency center, the big
with
generator.
With a generator. Yep. The generator is functioning now.
Get all the direction.
Yeah. The EOC is
all
huge.
Coordinated right there in Phoenix. That's pretty cool. Yeah. All righty. Well, it's been on my mind just watching what's going on in California, what we went through, and reservoir is a big thing. I mean, there's just so many talking points, and none of us has the answers, but we might hear something that.
So brainstorming session, it sounds like is maybe step number one, and then kind of maybe a trajectory would crystallize from there.
Okay.
But, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'll just, mention to Zach is here's what they're interested in doing and
how we proceed.
Yeah.
Ask for, a workshop. What would be done from this perspective, since we're looking at
Right.
if the city council has other things that they want to tack on, perhaps they can, because the scope could go huge.
Yeah.
They are just going to encompass everything, and it could actually become so overwhelming that we wouldn't be able to get much done. But it's from the purview of the planning commission. We could ask for what that's going to become present, what can be done from one of this planning perspective.
Scalability is
And I
important.
think like Sarah's saying is we need an expert. None of us are experts.
Yeah.
And I agree. We need to get somebody that's going to chair this thing.
We haven't learned. And now it'll just happen again.
Yeah.
And then well, it's happening across the nation, and if here, this is one of the few communities that has actually survived it and rebuilt. It's just, we didn't think much of it other than just to rebuild, but if there was some analogy to why these urban spaces, not actual out in the county and not out in the forest, none of that, these are urban environments.
Yeah.
That are burning down, and why is this happening right now? And you could say, oh, well, we just needed more water, but
Yeah.
what was the actual thing? This setbacks between the housing, the types of housing, the types of trees and the vegetation in between the housing that helped it catch.
Yeah. There's so many components to it too, right? Like another thing that Zach's been working on that kind of, is adjacent to this at least is we I don't know who the agency in charge is, but I know we have access to this camera. There are these corridor cameras that have really high resolution, and they're mounted on towers, and they're operated by some kind of like Wi-Fi. And they're just watchtowers, right? Like, you back in the day, you would post someone in a fire tower out in some rural area, and that was their job. But now we have these cameras to do that. And I'm not 100% sure if this one's infrared, but it's super high resolution, and it will provide a great amount of warning or heads up, like if something does, hit the fan. And they're going to be located where, you know, you might expect it, right? Like I think the camera is situated in the Greenway, if memory serves, but I can get more details on this. I think we posted it to our website, but that'll be you know, that's another tool Zach's been kind of working on to get ahead of this thing.
But I think we really gotta focus on what, like Julia said, what we can do as a planning commission.
Right.
And what code changes we can make and how that work. The Builders Association, that they're a great resource, and we could bring that person in and maybe bring Chief Hussey in from the fire department. He'd be glad to come in,
Yeah.
do a workshop here, and then melt that with city council and just know what we can or cannot do. But the Builders Association is a great source regarding building codes and fire-wise things to do, and Chief Hussey's got people in the fire department that do the same thing with fire codes.
Okay, great.
Because like you're saying, Jerry, it can go all over the place. We could spend days and days,
Mhm.
weeks
Oh, it's,
doing
Yeah.
that stuff.
Then when you finally figure it out, we can tell the rest of the other cities. You don't have to learn after the fire, you can probably learn before the fire.
Yeah.
I'm guessing there might be, maybe somebody who also does land use planning who has fire resiliency.
Yeah.
Or has done that, maybe there's somebody who can do that too.
A niche of like natural hazard preparedness, like the nexus between the two, land use and that. It's a tough line to walk too, right? Because it's like I don't know if you've heard in the news, there's some folks who are pretty nervous about the new wildfire map for our state and the implications on, you know, home, you know, like insurance for fire protection and things like that. And
we're moderate.
Country living is getting harder.
Well, we're moderate.
It's been
Which we've been-
where I live, it's not moderate, it's higher risk. Just because I'm on the edge of the city, it's near the farmland. So I think, I'm not positive, but I think in the city, there's different areas that are moderate. and high
So I
risk.
think basically, yeah, I know Talon, I think I think it's moderate. I know Shady Cove is red. You know, they're high risk, and a lot of areas are high risk. We're not high risk,
What are
is
the,
what I saw.
They keep saying that it is, I believe that they tried to prevent insurance companies from penalizing homeowners for being in the zone by making it legal for them to consider their location in the fire zone. Whether or not they find a workaround is, you know, the creativity of the insurance companies, but they did try to at least think of that ahead of time.
well, that's why we don't have much from the insurance companies, it's because the insurance companies may be repositories of like what happened, why, because they have to pay out at the end, but they actually have like little influence on telling people what to do, other than, hey, we'll give you a discount if you do this.
Well,
And
then
then-
my neighbors, he had to do a lot, otherwise he'd lose it. And then in California, one person I know had to re-roof his house. I mean, they're really lenient, on it. You know, there's a lot of, to renew your insurance, you gotta do certain things.
But now it's like they're gonna be even more, well, it's not just the roof, it's gonna be this, and this.
Yeah,
And
the
here's how much that's
siding,
gonna cost, and you need to pay that before you will even qualify for insurance. And we don't even have that game plan, because one of the laws that just got passed last year was allowing in the county lands to have ADUs. Everybody's been talking about building ADUs within the city, and it's like, okay, well, we're kind of always there, we just need maybe updates and more, but in the county, right outside the cities, having an ADU was damn near impossible until they just allowed it. I think the law happened 2-3 years ago, and then nobody could still build ADUs because while the wildfire map was still coming out, they said the county lands, everything in all this very, very rural spaces, everybody just kind of living their country dreams in the forest. It's like, well, that's also where there's the least amount of protection and the least amount of infrastructure. And you live out in the boonies and it's the hardest to bring the firemen and everybody to you. And that's when insurance has started to say, well, we're not going to support that way of life so much anymore because you can live out there. It's just, we're not going to insure you. You need to be self-insured, which the fire insurance is becoming such a big issue. I'm on the Jackson County Housing Authority board, and they have at least like 3,000-4,000 units, apartment buildings. And their big thing is that every time they just want millions and millions to keep redeveloping and keep developing and build this and then get it off, but they have requirements for the insurance, and the insurance is getting so much that they are like discussing with Oregon State that, wait a second, we can't be paying this much in health and, I mean, not in fire insurance. And they want to go, they want to be selfish. And what are the limits that they'll need to do that, just to work around, because they're like, wait a second, if we're getting either denied or the insurance companies are paying out so much everywhere. And we haven't even seen the worst of it, because after the Palisades burns down and the insurance maybe pays out part of the damage, they're not gonna pay the full amount of it, it will be part of it. They will, that company still needs to be around, and what will happen and how they have to fix things is gonna be by raising their rates. And that is the big pull and tug, is we're all gonna be feeling it. We already have been feeling it, and we're kind of gritching about the insurance. And the insurance doesn't have a clue either on what to do, other than it's just natural disaster after natural disaster after natural, and they're reeling and reacting. And have little to no influence over the very causes of these disasters themselves.
Okay, good discussion. Thank you, everybody. Was there anything more that you had to add?
No, I think we covered the basics. Just those, we have quite a few just development code amendments on the horizon. And then we've got that one project, the affordable housing project in the east side of town coming through the pipeline. It was posted. It's on our website, and it's looking like an approval so far, tentative approval with conditions based on what they submitted. I think there's going to be between like 70 and 80 dwelling units. So yeah, otherwise, this is kind of the off season for development, so it's a little quiet, but I think it's going to pick up here pretty soon.
Is that along Grove Road going up?
Yes, sir. Fern Valley and Grove Road, that corner.
So years and years ago, we, as a city, decided to not add lighting. When you drive up there, it's dark as can be.
Mhm.
And the theory was wait till they develop and make the developer put the street lighting in, so it won't cost the city anything. Is it possible to do that and have a developer put in lights, street lighting? If you don't have an answer, I understand, but that was a theory years and years ago.
Well, there certainly is going to be lighting required. But I don't know about street lighting. I think we talked about this at our November meeting, actually.
Yeah.
Our code prescribes lighting in all kinds of situations, but on the street,
Only on their property.
yeah, it's strange how our code reads currently, but our code does not have requirements for Cobra headlights. It prescribes all day long, oh, you need a bike lane, you need curb gutter and sidewalk, you need planting strips, street trees, all that. Very quiet on streetlights. I don't think that it's in chapter 3.5 if you want to take a look, but I've looked several times and I haven't really, I don't think seen anything for
I don't think
streetlight
that's how
requirements.
I don't see how that can happen.
We put in the code.
So yeah, we can.
I mean, there's already sidewalks and everything there. They just do whatever they do on their property.
Okay.
There was one group
Really
that I
pushing
kind of
it.
followed that was called Strong Towns, and they really believed in supporting a very strong downtown. And there was this one economist that came in and talked, I think he was also hired by Eugene to come in and talk about why does the town not have so much money compared to other places with this, and this economist's theory was that if you take a look at the property values, because all cities raise most of their taxes from property taxes, and his thesis was that when there are subdivisions and other things that go on the outside of town, is that the city ends up subsidizing those subdivisions on the outside of town through paying a bunch of infrastructure, and then those subdivisions don't become very high tax dollar amount properties. But if you take a look at the closer downtown that it is, there's buildings that are usually a little bit bigger, a little taller. They're already tapped into the infrastructure there, and they make more money from a thriving downtown commercial places, because those are actually where you can have a $20 million building and suddenly the city's like, yes, I can charge taxes on that. So it was interesting when you were talking earlier about, I mean, these parking things that are going up, and we're like, okay, wait, we're not going to put it on
anybody else to build their own parking. The city's just gonna do it. Maybe that's kind of a policy thing that's happening in Oregon to bring down the barriers just to do construction, but that's an interesting idea instead of like making them build the lights. You're like, hey, we're the city, we'll build the lights. You go ahead and build the biggest most beautiful building you can think of. And when he taxes says that we'll be getting the cost of those lights back. That's really how towns like this thrive, is by property taxes. And so what can we do to help other people increase and make a thriving centers that make that good one? You know, one thing I've noticed, I've worked for Talent and Jackson County and now here. The lighting requirements in other jurisdictions, they do seem to have street lighting requirements. And so I'd be kind of curious to see if there was some intention behind it. Like I would maybe check out the comp plan and see if there's something in there. But I think in this case, it's so quiet, it's almost like an omission, like you would expect there to be some kind of mention of like, and here's why we're not requiring it, or something in there if it was like a political move or policy rather move. But anyways, yeah, I'll take a note. And but yeah, I think White City, for instance, in Jackson County has streetlight requirements, and Talent does as well for new streets and things like that.
Yeah, but you think next time we can power through both commercial and industrial the same day?
We can try.
You try. Okay.
Yep.
So if we're all up to speed and have our questions ready, maybe get through it pretty quick, maybe not.
I'll shoot for it. Absolutely. And then we'll probably have Zach here to help keep pace and keep things going quickly too. I think I went off the subject a couple times here.
We did. I apologize. We should have held questions till later, but
Yeah, they're really prepared.
Yeah, we can aggregate all your feedback and literally just have a list of like, okay, here's what you sent us. Here's what, and then having a list like that before the meeting helps us prepare too. And something, to keep for the record too, of like how this thing has evolved over time and here's why, so.
You can share the Q&A with everybody before the meeting too. Everyone's questions, everyone's answers.
Yeah.
That helps.
so looking at our calendar, February, what are we looking at?
I think I don't want to speak for Zach, but I suspect it's going to be 2 weeks. And I will let you know ASAP as soon as I confirm that.
Okay.
But he wants to keep hammering out this non-policy related thing because we have so many other development code updates. And if we don't get them done now before development season, it's going to be that much harder when we start getting more conditional uses. I suspect we'll probably get a couple.
Council meets on the 3rd, and so we're open for the 10th or the 3rd or the 17th.
I think we're the second Monday and the
We're the
fourth
second.
Monday, right?
February 10th.
Second and 4th, so that'd be the 10th, possibly.
I would
Wait.
keep that one available if you can, and I will let you know as soon as
Okay.
possible if we're off.
10th or the 24th, okay. All righty, is there, we got no old business, comments from commissioners? Starting with you, Julie, do you have anything?
Appreciate the welcome. Thank you all for being so friendly and inviting. Thank you, Jack, for taking the time to explain things simply.
Welcome.
Sarah?
Wonderful to meet you all. Look forward to getting to know you and working together the next couple of years.
Thank you. Anything? Marcel?
I just want to welcome the new commissioners and welcome everybody else back.
Chris?
Good. Thanks.
We're good, so, Pinehurst report, anything?
Think we covered it already,
We
kind of
covered it
as we
all.
went along.
Well, with that, no other comments, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much needed.
Thank
Are you losing back the night weekend, back in the place? Very good.
I'm not in the same place, I'm downstairs,
You're where?
downstairs,
Well, downstairs, we got.
I'm not-
we're in the same Conference.
no,
Okay, good.
I'm number 2.
Better be downstairs, let's walk here.
Right,
It's
right.
good. So, welcome back.
But it's good to be back.
No, don't worry about it. I had a hard time coming because. The announcement, I'm usually used to somebody telling me where to go. Well, I told them the hospital to get on. There's a new email, you have to open up a whole new email for this, and then they only check that, and then that's.
I'm not worried about it.
Oh, I